The stool was warm because somebody just left it. You sat down, and before you said a word, the woman behind the counter was already reaching for a plate. She knew what you came for, a full meal heavy enough to carry you through the afternoon for coins you counted out of your pocket. That was how lunch worked in black neighborhoods across the South in the 1960s. A counter with stools, a short menu in chalk, and a kitchen run by women who turned the cheapest cuts at the butcher into plates nobody has been able to replicate since. Number 19 on this list started with bones the butcher practically gave away, and the pot they went into fed the whole counter through the afternoon. Number 14 used to cost pennies a plate, and today the same cut runs more than a full dinner out. And number 7 came out of the oven so good that people ordered dessert before they ordered their meal. The food industry spent decades trying to copy what these women built from memory and instinct and never came close. Hit subscribe because this kind of history deserves more than a passing mention. Here are 25 forgotten lunch counter plates black families ordered in the 1960s. Number 25, egg salad plate, hard-boiled eggs, chopped with a fork and mixed with mayonnaise, mustard, salt, pepper, and a little sweet pickle relish, spread thick on white bread or served as a scoop on a plate with crackers and a leaf of lettuce. At black lunch counters, egg salad was the order that kept the overhead low and the kitchen moving. Eggs cost almost nothing. A dozen stretched into plates for half the afternoon. The woman behind the counter mixed the batch in the morning, pressed it into a bowl covered with a damp cloth, and served it cold all day. No stove needed, no reheating, no waste. You could eat it in 5 minutes and be back to work. Most people ordered it without thinking. It was the plate you pointed to when you had just enough in your pocket for lunch and not a cent more. Number 24, fried bologna sandwich. A thick slice of bologna scored around the edges so it would not curl, dropped into a hot skillet and fried until the outside blistered and the fat rendered out, laid on white bread with mustard and a slice of raw onion. At black lunch counters, the fried bologna sandwich was the plate that people ordered when they wanted something hot and filling and did not want to wait. The scoring was what separated a good one from a bad one. Without the cuts, the slice buckled in the center and the edges lifted off the pan. With them, the whole thing lay flat and browned evenly, and the blistered spots turned crisp while the center stayed soft. The bread soaked up the grease from the fry and the mustard cut through the salt. A fried bologna sandwich cost less than almost anything else on the board. The kitchen could have one plated in under 2 minutes. Number 23, hamburger steak with brown gravy. Ground beef shaped into a thick oval, seared on a flat griddle and covered in a dark gravy made from the pan drippings, a little flour, and whatever stock was left from the morning. It came with rice or bread, and the gravy was what held the whole plate together. At black lunch counters, hamburger steak split the difference between wanting something that felt like supper and only having enough for lunch. The meat was never lean. The fat kept it tender and gave the gravy something to work with. Some places pressed the patty thin and let the edges crisp. Some made it thick, almost like a small meatloaf, with stewed tomatoes on the side. Either way, you sat for a second after you finished, not because you were still hungry, but because you were not ready to leave. Number 22, liver and onions plate. Sliced beef liver, soaked in buttermilk to pull the bitterness out, dredged in seasoned flour, and fried in a hot skillet until the outside set firm and the inside stayed just past pink. Buried under a pile of onions that had been cooked slow in the same pan until they turned soft and sweet and nearly transparent. Served with rice and gravy made from the drippings. Liver was one of the cheapest cuts at the butcher counter. Most people outside the neighborhood would not touch it. That kept the price low and the supply steady. The buttermilk soak was the step that made the difference. Without it, the liver tasted sharp and metallic. With it, the mineral edge softened and the flour crust held during the fry. The onions were not a garnish. They were half the plate. Cooked until they collapsed into the gravy, they turned the whole dish into something that tasted like twice the money it cost. Number 21, beef tips and rice. Cubes of beef, usually whatever trim the butcher had left, browned in a pot and braised with onion, garlic, and a dark gravy made from flour and broth until the meat softened and the sauce turned thick enough to coat a spoon, spooned over white rice. This plate sat between a stew and a proper dinner, and that middle ground was exactly where lunch counter cooking lived. The beef was never tender to start. Tough cuts were what the kitchen could afford, and the long, slow braise did the work that money could not. The gravy carried most of the flavor, dark, salty, and heavy with the drippings from the sear. The rice underneath caught everything. At counters that served beef tips, the pot started early in the morning and sat on the back burner all day, getting better with every hour. The last plate of the day tasted richer than the first. Number 20, chili over spaghetti. A ladle of thick, meaty chili poured over a bed of boiled spaghetti noodles, topped with diced raw onion and sometimes shredded cheese. This plate crossed regional lines. You could find it in Memphis, in St. Louis, in Detroit, in any city where black families had settled during the Great Migration and brought their cooking with them. The chili was ground beef cooked down with tomatoes, kidney beans, chili powder, and cumin until it was thick enough to sit on top of the noodles without sliding off. The spaghetti was always overcooked by modern standards, soft enough that it blended with the chili into one heavy forkful. That was intentional. A plate of this filled you up for less than the price of a pack of cigarettes at the time. To the people who grew up eating it, chili over spaghetti sounds like Tuesday. The lunch counter in a black neighborhood during the 1960s was not a restaurant in the way most people use that word today. It was a counter with stools, usually inside a drugstore or a corner shop, sometimes in the front room of somebody's house with a hand-lettered sign in the window. The menu was short, the plates were heavy, the prices were written in chalk, and they changed when the cost of flour changed. These places did not have names that ended up in history books. They did not get reviewed or photographed, but they fed entire neighborhoods 6 days a week, 50 weeks a year. The women who ran these kitchens cooked for volume and for flavor, not for presentation. When a plate left the window, it was full. That was the only standard. Number 19, neck bones and rice, pork neck bones, browned in a heavy pot and then braised low and slow with onion, garlic, salt, pepper, and enough water to cover until the meat pulled away from the bone with no resistance and the broth reduced into a thick, sticky gravy, spooned over white rice and served with hot sauce on the side. Neck bones were the cut that the butcher had trouble selling. Too bony for roasts, too awkward to slice, not enough clean meat to justify the work for most people. The women who ran lunch counters saw them differently. A few pounds of neck bones cost almost nothing, and the connective tissue between the vertebrae melted during the braise and gave the broth a body that no other cut could match. The collagen dissolved into the liquid and turned it silky and rich without adding a drop of fat from outside. The rice was the foundation. It absorbed the broth and turned each grain heavy with the flavor of the pork and the long cooking. Regulars ate the plate with their hands, picking the bones clean and sucking the marrow from the joints, because the best part of a neck bone was never the meat you could see. It was the flavor trapped inside the bone itself. At counters that served neck bones, the pot went on in the early morning and simmered until the lunch rush. By noon, the bones had given up everything they had, and the broth had thickened into something closer to a sauce than a soup. A plate cost next to nothing. This was the plate that turned scraps into a full afternoon. Number 18, lima beans with smoked meat, large dried lima beans, soaked overnight and simmered in a pot with a smoked turkey leg until the beans turned soft and the broth thickened from the starch. Served with cornbread and hot sauce on the side. Lima beans were a lunch counter staple that never got the attention collard greens or black-eyed peas received, but they filled the same role, cheap, filling, and able to feed a crowd from a single pot. The smoked turkey flavored the entire batch without adding much to the cost. A leg bought for almost nothing gave a pot of limas enough salt and depth to carry the whole afternoon. The beans broke down along the edges and thickened the broth into something that sat heavy on a piece of cornbread without running off. Number 17, pinto beans and cornbread. Slow-cooked pinto beans, seasoned with smoked meat, served alongside a wedge of cornbread baked in a cast iron pan. This was the lunch counter plate that needed no explanation. Everybody knew what it was, everybody had eaten it at home, and everybody had an opinion about whether the cornbread should be sweet or not. In Black communities across the South, the answer was almost always not. The cornbread was savory, dense, and baked until the bottom crust turned dark from the hot grease in the pan. You crumbled the cornbread into the beans, or you ate them side by side, but either way, you left full. A lunch counter could stretch a pot of pinto beans across an entire afternoon for pennies a plate. That efficiency kept the doors open. Number 16, pig feet plate, split pig feet, simmered in a pot of seasoned water with vinegar, bay leaf, red pepper flakes, onion, and salt until the cartilage turned soft enough to chew and the skin went tender and gelatinous. Served in a bowl with some of the cooking broth and a piece of cornbread on the side. At lunch counters, pig feet were the plate that separated the regulars from the visitors. If you did not grow up eating them, the sight of a split hoof on a plate stopped you cold. If you did grow up eating them, you sat down and picked the bones clean without a second thought. The collagen in the joints and the skin gave the broth a thickness that coated your lips and fingers, and the meat, what little there was between the tendons, carried a richness that leaner cuts could not touch. Pig feet cost the kitchen almost nothing. The butcher sold them by the bag for pennies because most customers walked right past them. Number 15, hot water cornbread. Cornmeal mixed with boiling water, a pinch of salt, and sometimes a little sugar, shaped by hand into flat oval patties and fried in a skillet of hot grease until the outside turned crisp and dark and the inside stayed dense and slightly gummy. Served alongside greens or beans or eaten alone with butter. Hot water cornbread was not the same as baked cornbread, and the people who grew up on it will correct you fast. There was no egg, no milk, no buttermilk, no leavening. The boiling water cooked the cornmeal just enough to hold it together, and the frying did the rest. The texture was heavier, chewier, and the crust crackled in a way that oven cornbread never could. At lunch counters, hot water cornbread stretched the meal further because it cost almost nothing and filled the plate. The lunch counter did not disappear because the food failed. The format collapsed A counter with stools in a small storefront, a short menu chalked on a board, one or two people in the kitchen, prices low enough that a working family could eat without planning ahead. That model could not survive what came after the 1970s. Rents climbed, food costs climbed faster, the fast food chains moved in with budgets that no neighborhood counter could match, and they offered speed and consistency in exchange for everything else. The women who ran these kitchens were not replaced. They retired or they passed, and the knowledge of how to feed 40 people from a single stove with no written recipes went with them. The plates on this list are not complicated. Most of them have fewer than 6 ingredients, but the counters where they were served, the stools where people sat, the neighborhoods that held them, those are what disappeared. Number 14, oxtail stew plate, thick cross-cut sections of oxtail, browned in a heavy pot until the outside caramelized, then braised for hours with onion, garlic, carrots, tomato, thyme, and enough broth to keep the bones covered. Served over white rice with the brazen liquid spooned on top. Oxtails were the throwaway cut. The butcher sold them for almost nothing because they were mostly bone and connective tissue, and the cooking time required to make them edible discouraged anyone in a hurry. That was the whole advantage. The women who ran lunch counters had the one thing most home cooks did not: a stove that ran all day. A pot of oxtails went on in the early morning and sat on the back burner through the lunch rush, and by the time someone ordered a plate, the meat had been braising for 5 or 6 hours. The collagen in the joints and the marrow inside the bones dissolved into the broth over those hours and turned the liquid into something closer to a sauce than a soup. Rich, sticky, dark, and heavy, with the flavor of the sear and the slow breakdown of the cartilage. The meat itself, once tough enough to resist a knife, fell from the bone at the touch of a fork. Each section of oxtail carried a ring of soft, trembling meat around a center of a marrow that melted on the tongue. The rice underneath absorbed the liquid and swelled until each grain carried the full weight of the braise. Today, oxtails are one of the most expensive cuts at the butcher. The same bones that were practically given away in the 1960s now carry a price that reflects decades of rediscovery. The taste never changed. The audience did. Number 13, pepper steak plate, strips of beef stir-fried with green bell pepper, onion, and tomato served over white rice. This was a lunch counter plate that arrived through the back door of the Great Migration. Families that settled in cities brought Southern cooking with them, but the city introduced new influences. Chinese takeout counters and black lunch counters existed side by side in many neighborhoods, and pepper steak was where the two traditions met. The beef was sliced thin enough to cook fast, which kept the cost down. The peppers and onions stretched the meat across a full plate, and the sauce, a simple combination of soy, garlic, and broth, thickened over the rice into something that tasted nothing like the rest of the menu. At counters that served it, pepper steak surprised people the first time and became a regular order after that. Number 12, baked spaghetti, boiled spaghetti noodles mixed with ground beef, tomato sauce, onion, garlic, salt, and pepper, layered into a pan, covered with shredded cheese, and run through the oven until the cheese browned and the edges crisped, served in thick squares cut from the pan. Nobody would have called it Italian food. This was lunch counter food built from whatever was cheap and available, and it was one of the plates that children remembered most. The noodles soaked up the sauce during the bake and turned soft and heavy, and the ground beef gave each bite enough substance to count as a full meal. The cheese on top held the whole thing together so it could be cut and served without falling apart. A pan of baked spaghetti fed a lunch counter through the entire afternoon and cost the kitchen next to nothing. Number 11, meatloaf plate, ground beef mixed with breadcrumbs, egg, diced onion, and ketchup, shaped into a loaf and baked until the top caramelized under a layer of tomato paste, sliced thick and served with mashed potatoes and green beans cooked with a piece of smoked meat. At lunch counters, meatloaf was the Monday plate in a lot of kitchens. The weekend's leftover bread became the binder, and the ground beef was whatever the butcher had available at the end of the week. Nobody followed a recipe. The proportions shifted depending on how much meat there was and how many people needed to eat. The ketchup glaze on top kept the surface from drying out during the bake. A thick slice of this with potatoes and gravy was the kind of lunch that made the afternoon feel shorter. Number 10, pork chop sandwich. A bone-in pork chop seasoned with salt and pepper, dredged in flour, and fried in a skillet until the crust went dark and the bone poked out past the bread on both sides. Served between 2 slices of white bread with hot sauce and pickles. Nothing else, the bone stayed in because removing it would have shrunk the sandwich and wasted time. You held the bread around the meat and ate around the bone, and the grease from the chop soaked through the bottom slice before you were halfway done. At lunch counters in the South, the fried pork chop sandwich was the plate that working men ordered when they wanted to eat with one hand and keep moving. The chop was thin enough to cook in minutes and heavy enough to carry a person through a full shift. 1 chop, 2 slices of bread, and the cost stayed low enough that nobody had to count their change twice. Number 9, chitterlings plate. The cleaned and boiled intestines of a hog simmered for hours until tender, served with hot sauce, vinegar, and cornbread. The smell of chitterlings cooking is unmistakable, and it divided the neighborhood. You either grew up around that smell and it meant Saturday, or you crossed the street to avoid it. At black lunch counters that served them, chitterlings were not a daily item. They required too much labor. The cleaning alone took hours, and the cooking took several more. When they appeared on the menu, regulars planned around it. The preparation was a test of skill passed between generations, and the women who ran these kitchens took pride in chitterlings that came out tender, clean tasting, and free of bitterness. By the 1970s, the counters that served chitterlings were among the first to close because the dish demanded time and patience that a small kitchen could no longer afford. Number 8, sardine plate. A can of sardines opened at the counter, turned out onto a plate, and served with saltine crackers, sliced onion, hot sauce, and a wedge of lemon. Nothing cooked, nothing heated, nothing that required more than 30 seconds of preparation. At black lunch counters, the sardine plate was the order that working people placed when they had 10 minutes and needed to eat. The fish was salty, oily, and packed with enough protein to carry a person through an afternoon of physical labor. The crackers gave it structure, and the hot sauce cut through the richness of the oil. A sardine plate cost less than anything else on the menu and required less labor from the kitchen than any other item on the board. That economy mattered. A lunch counter that could serve 5 sardine plates in the time it took to fry 1 pork chop stayed open longer. Every plate on this list came from the same arithmetic. Take the cheapest ingredients available, the cuts of meat the butcher could not sell, the vegetables that grew without much help, the grains that stored through winter. Cook them long enough and season them well enough that a plate costing pennies tasted like something worth sitting down for. That arithmetic was not optional, it was survival. Black families in the 1960s did not choose these ingredients out of preference. They chose them because the economic system they lived inside offered nothing else. And then something shifted. The food became tradition. the necessity became culture. The plates that started as the cheapest possible way to eat became the dishes people missed the most decades after the counters closed and the neighborhoods changed and the prices of those same ingredients climbed beyond recognition. Number 7, peach cobbler. Sliced peaches, fresh in the summer and canned the rest of the year, layered into a baking dish with sugar, cinnamon, and a squeeze of lemon, then topped with a batter made from flour, sugar, butter, and milk, and baked until the crust rose up around the fruit and turned golden brown on top and soaked with juice on the bottom. Peach cobbler at a black lunch counter was not the delicate lattice-top version that appeared in magazine photographs. It was baked in a deep pan, cut into squares, and served warm with the juices pooling on the plate. The batter was poured directly over the fruit and the oven did the rest. No rolling pin, no crimped edges, no technique that required practice. The simplicity was the whole point. The peaches broke down during the bake and released their juice into the batter, which absorbed it from below and turned dense and custardy at the bottom, while the exposed top went crisp. That contrast, soft and syrupy underneath and crackled on top, was what brought people back. The cinnamon ran through every bite and the lemon kept the sweetness from flattening out. At counters where the cook-baked cobbler, it sold before the lunch plates did. A regular might order a square before even looking at the chalkboard, because once the pan was gone, it was gone. The canned peaches worked nearly as well as fresh, and that mattered. A lunch counter could serve peach cobbler in January the same as July. The women who baked it knew the pan needed to come out when the top had just set and the center still trembled, because the residual heat would finish the bake. Pull it too late and the crust dried out. Pull it right and the bottom stayed wet with fruit for hours. Number 6, sloppy Joe plate. Ground beef cooked with onion, green pepper, ketchup, mustard, and a little vinegar until the mixture turned thick and tangy, spooned over a hamburger bun or a piece of bread. At black lunch counters, the sloppy Joe was a plate that did not try to be more than it was. Fast, cheap, messy, and satisfying. The ground beef stretched further with the sauce than it would have as a plain burger, and the sweetness of the ketchup balanced the salt and the acid in a way that made people eat faster than they planned to. Children ordered it more than adults. The adults who ordered it usually had children at home on the same budget. A sloppy Joe plate with a side left changed from $1 in the 1960s. Number 5, fried pork tenderloin sandwich. A thin slice of pork loin pounded flat with a mallet until it spread wider than the bread, dredged in seasoned flour, and fried until the coating went crisp and golden. Served on a bun or bread with pickles and mustard. The tenderloin hung over the edges on all sides, and that overhang was the whole appeal. You saw the size of it before you tasted it, and the visual alone told you that whoever made it was not cutting corners. At black lunch counters, the fried pork tenderloin sandwich was a Midwestern import that traveled south with great migration families and took root wherever someone with an Indiana or Ohio upbringing opened a kitchen. The pounding was the technique that made it work, thinning the meat until it cooked in minutes and stretched a single chop across a full plate. Number 4, stewed okra and tomatoes plate. Fresh okra sliced into rounds and cooked in a pot with canned tomatoes, onion, garlic, salt, pepper, and a piece of smoked meat until the okra softened and the tomatoes broke down into a thick, tangy sauce. Served over rice or with cornbread on the side. Okra grew in nearly every backyard garden in the South, and the tomatoes came from the same patch or from a can that cost next to nothing. Together, They made a pot that stretched across the entire afternoon. The acid in the tomatoes cut through the natural slickness of the okra, and the smoked meat gave the broth enough depth to turn a bowl of vegetables into a full meal. At lunch counters, stewed okra and tomatoes was the plate the kitchen served when the meat ran low. It cost almost nothing, and nobody who ate it felt shortchanged. Number 3, Vienna sausage plate. Small canned Vienna sausages turned out of the can and served at room temperature with saltine crackers, mustard, and sliced pickles. At black lunch counters, this was the plate that required no cooking, no heating, and no time. A can cost a few cents and fed a person who was in a hurry and did not have much in a pocket. The sausages were soft, salty, and packed in a broth that some people poured off and others soaked into the crackers. Children ate them as a snack between school and supper. Adults ate them as a full meal when the budget allowed nothing else. There was no pretense to a Vienna sausage plate. You opened the can, you set it on the counter, you ate, and you kept moving. Number 2, fried corn and fatback plate. Fresh corn cut from the cob, scraped to get the milk out of the kernels, fried in a skillet with rendered fatback, salt, pepper, and a pinch of sugar. The fatback went into the pan first and cooked until the fat melted out and the edges of the pork crisped into small, crackling pieces. Then the corn went in and fried in that fat until the kernels browned on the bottom and the starch thickened into a creamy paste that held the whole skillet together. At black lunch counters during the summer, fried corn and fatback was the plate that appeared when the fields came in and disappeared when the season ended. The corn had to be fresh enough that the kernels still popped when you pressed a thumbnail into them. The fatback gave it salt and richness, and the cracklings gave it texture. Some places served it as a side. Others served it as the whole plate, a heap of fried corn piled high with the cracklings scattered across the top. Either way, nobody walked away hungry. Number 1, the plate lunch. Not a single dish, but the entire idea. 1 protein, 2 or 3 sides, bread, and something to drink served on a single heavy plate for a price a working person could pay without thinking twice. The plate lunch was the invention that held black lunch counters together. You walk in, you sit down, you eat a full meal, and you walk out fed. No surprises, no upselling, no pretension. You pointed at the chalkboard or told the woman behind the counter what you wanted, and it arrived in minutes. The genius was its simplicity. 1 plate, everything on it, done. The lunch counters that serve this format are nearly all closed now. But the idea, the belief that a complete meal should be affordable and filling and served without ceremony did not vanish. It just lost its address. Number 23, beef tongue sandwich. The tongue came in whole, boiled until tender, peeled, sliced thin, and laid across rye bread with mustard and a pickle spear. Jewish delis on the Lower East Side made it famous, but Harlem counters served their own version, seasoned differently, often with hot sauce and a slice of raw onion. It was a working man's meal. The texture sat between roast beef and corned beef, and the flavor was richer than both. A tongue sandwich at a Harlem counter in the 1950s cost about 30 cents. The dish held through the 1970s, but as the counters disappeared, so did the cooks who knew how to handle the cut. Today, whole beef tongue is still available at butcher shops, but almost no restaurant in Harlem or anywhere else serves it on bread. Sugar sandwiches represented pure survival wrapped in sweetness, a lunch that cost almost nothing but delivered calories desperate bodies needed. White bread was spread with butter or margarine, then sprinkled generously with sugar until the surface sparkled. Children bit into the soft bread and felt granules dissolve on their tongues, a moment of sweetness in difficult days. Mothers made these knowing sugar provided quick energy even when protein was out of reach. In neighborhoods where food stamps ran out before the month did, sugar sandwiches appeared without explanation. Kids ate them gratefully, licking their fingers clean. The sandwich was proof that parents would find ways to feed their children no matter how little they had. Sugar sandwiches carried no pretense, just honest sustenance born from necessity and love. Number 18, baked spare ribs with sauerkraut. This dish showed up on Harlem menus because of the neighborhood's layered history. Before the Great Migration brought Black families north, Harlem had been home to German and Irish immigrants. The German influence left sauerkraut in the local food supply, and Black cooks folded it into their own cooking. Spare ribs baked low and slow on a bed of sauerkraut until the pork fat rendered into the cabbage and the meat slid off the bone. The tang of the kraut cut through the richness of the pork in a way that made the plate feel lighter than it was. By the 1970s, the dish had faded. Younger cooks had no connection to the German crossover, and the ingredients stopped making sense. The combination disappeared with the generation that understood it. Vienna sausages, straight from the can, became lunch when time, money, and options had all run short. These small, pale sausages, packed in briny liquid, were eaten cold, sometimes with crackers and sometimes alone. Children would spear them with forks or fingers, chewing through soft casings and salty meat without complaint. The cans were cheap and required nothing but a pull tab opener, perfect for families without working stoves. Mothers kept. Vienna sausages stocked because they provided protein when nothing else could. The taste was mild and slightly tinny, but sausages filled bellies and provided energy. In Black households across the country, Vienna sausages were practical, representing determination to keep children fed. Kids grew up remembering the metallic smell of those cans, a sensory marker of childhoods shaped by necessity. Number 20, braised pig knuckles. In the old Harlem counters, pig knuckles sat in a deep pan on the steam table, braised until the skin turned translucent and the collagen melted into the cooking liquid. The knuckle carries almost no lean meat. What it has is fat, tendon, cartilage, and skin, all of which break down over hours into something rich and sticky. Eating one was not delicate. You picked it up with both hands and worked around the bone. The broth soaked into whatever starch sat beside it, usually rice or white bread. A plate cost almost nothing because the cut had no market value outside of Black and German neighborhoods. When the counters closed, the knuckle lost its last public stage. The braised steam table version that fed Harlem for decades is gone. Here's something worth saying before this list goes further. The Harlem lunch counter was never just a place to eat. It was a hiring hall, a message board, a bank. Women who ran those kitchens extended credit to customers they trusted. A man between jobs could eat for a week on a handshake. A mother could send her child in with a note and know the plate would be right. These counters ran on reputation, and reputation ran on food. When urban renewal tore through Harlem in the 1950s and 1960s, it did not just demolish buildings. It broke networks. A counter that closed on 125th Street took with it 30 years of relationships, recipes that existed only in one woman's memory, and a credit system no bank would ever replace. What follows are the dishes those kitchens served. Each one carried more than calories. Syrup sandwiches carried the deep amber color of sorghum or corn syrup pooled between slices of bread, sticky and sweet enough to quiet, growling stomachs. Children would bite into soft bread and feel syrup ooze slightly, coating lips and fingers with sweetness. This was end of the month food, made when pantries held only staples and families waited for checks. Mothers poured carefully, knowing exactly how much would satisfy without wasting supplies. The bread absorbed just enough to hold together while the rest created a thick, gooey center. Kids ate these with focus, savoring the sugar rush that carried them through afternoon classes. In rural Black communities, syrup sandwiches connected generations who had eaten the same meals during their own lean childhoods. Sweetness could be found even in scarcity. Number 19, meatloaf with brown gravy. This was the backbone of the Harlem lunch counter. Not a side dish, not a special, not a weekend item. Meatloaf sat on the steam table every single day because it was the one plate that moved no matter what else was available. Ground beef, sometimes stretched with breadcrumbs or oatmeal when the budget ran thin. Onion, salt, pepper, and egg to hold it together. Mixed by hand, shaped in a loaf pan, baked until the edges pulled away from the sides. Sliced thick, laid on a plate with 2 scoops of mashed potatoes. The whole thing disappeared under a ladle of brown gravy made from the drippings. A plate in 1962 ran about 35 cents. For that price, a working person got enough food to carry them through an afternoon shift. The gravy was the key. Dark, salty, heavy, with rendered fat, it tied everything on the plate into one meal. Customers did not come back for the meat. They came back for the gravy. By the late 1970s, the economics stopped working. Ground beef prices rose, rent rose faster. The counters that survived into the 1980s cut the recipe thinner, added more filler, reduced the portion. Customers noticed the meatloaf that had held a counter's reputation for 20 years began tasting like something else entirely. When those last counters closed, the dish did not move to restaurants. It moved to memory. The women who made it measured by hand and by sight. A handful of this, a pour of that. The gravy ratio changed every morning depending on how much dripping the previous day's roast had left. No 2 days tasted exactly the same, and that was the point. That kind of cooking does not transfer to a recipe card. When the last cook turned off the stove, the recipe went with her. Government cheese sandwiches were built from thick orange slabs distributed through commodity programs that kept poor families fed. This cheese came in large blocks wrapped in plain packaging, its bright color unmistakable to anyone who had lived on assistance. Sliced thick between bread, the cheese melted slightly at room temperature, becoming soft and creamy. Children ate these knowing they came from government hands, a fact carrying both gratitude and quiet shame. Mothers transformed commodity cheese into countless meals, stretching blocks across weeks. The flavor was mild but satisfying, providing calcium and protein growing children needed. Government cheese sandwiches connected families across neighborhoods, a shared marker of economic struggle. Kids packed them carefully, learning early that survival sometimes meant accepting help. Number 22, rice pudding. Not the boxed kind, not the cold cup from a deli case. Harlem lunch counter. Rice pudding was baked in deep hotel pans with whole milk, eggs, sugar, vanilla, and a heavy hand of nutmeg on top. It came out of the oven with a golden skin that cracked when the spoon broke through. Every counter had it, usually in the glass case near the register, where customers could see it before they ordered. It was the cheapest dessert in the building, and it moved faster than anything else after 3 in the afternoon. School children bought it. Night shift workers took it home in wax paper cups. The homemade version disappeared when the counters closed, replaced by factory cups with a shelf life measured in months. Ketchup sandwiches emerged when refrigerators held nothing but condiments and hope, turning a squeeze bottle into the main course. 2 slices of bread with ketchup spread across them became lunch for children whose families had stretched every dollar past its breaking point. The tangy sweetness gave flavor where none existed, and the red spread looked almost cheerful against pale bread. Kids learned to accept these without complaint because something was better than nothing. Mothers handed them over with quiet resolve, knowing tomorrow might bring better meals. The ketchup provided vitamins and enough taste to make bread worth chewing. There was an unspoken code that no one mocked another child's lunch because everyone had eaten ketchup sandwiches at some point. These meals represented the thin line between hunger and survival. Number 24, creamed codfish on toast. Salt cod crossed the Atlantic with the slave trade, and it never left the black kitchen. In Harlem, lunch counter cooks soaked dried codfish overnight, pulled it apart by hand, and folded it into a thick white sauce made from butter, flour, and whole milk. They spooned it over toast cut corner to corner. The dish was filling, cheap, and gentle enough for a customer with bad teeth. By the 1950s, nearly every steam table counter on Lenox Avenue had a version. It required patience, hours of soaking to draw out the salt, constant stirring so the sauce did not seize. When the counters closed, nobody picked it up. Fast food had no version of it. Diners had no interest. Creamed codfish on toast vanished from the American plate, and most people born after 1975 have never heard of it. Potted meat on crackers was the lunch that came from small tins stacked in pantry corners. Affordable protein requiring no refrigeration or cooking. The pinkish paste was spread across saltines, each assembled carefully to stretch the tin as far as possible. Children ate them in sequence, the salty crunch giving way to soft, vaguely meaty filling that tasted like survival itself. Potted meat cost pennies and lasted months on shelves, making it reliable when fresh food was out of reach. Mothers packed these crackers in napkins, sending children to school with humble but filling lunches. The taste was distinctive, slightly metallic, but satisfying in ways only necessity could explain. The small tins represented ingenuity, turning shelf-stable ingredients into meals that kept families fed through the hardest weeks. Number 25, beef short rib stew. Before a Harlem lunch counter opened for the day, a pot of short ribs had already been simmering for hours in the back. The cut was cheap because butchers considered it waste. Too much bone, too much gristle, not enough clean meat for a proper roast. But slow heat turned all of that into something dark and rich, falling off the bone into a broth thick enough to hold a spoon upright. A plate with white rice and cornbread cost less than $1 through the early 1960s. The women running those kitchens bought ribs by the case. Today, beef short ribs sell for $9 or $10 a pound. The cut that built lunch counter Harlem is now a luxury item on restaurant menus, charging $40 a plate. The stew is gone. Sardines and crackers appeared at lunch tables as an unlikely but reliable source of nutrition when money was tight. The small, oily fish were pulled from flat tins and laid across saltines, silver scales glistening under kitchen lights. Children learned to eat sardines without grimacing because protein was protein and hunger did not allow pickiness. The fish provided essential fatty acids and calcium from tiny edible bones, nutrition that growing bodies needed. Mothers bought sardines in bulk when sales appeared, stocking shelves with tins that lasted through uncertain weeks. The smell was strong, and kids sometimes ate near windows to spare the house the aroma. Sardines and crackers became a shared experience among children from struggling families. The meal taught lessons about gratitude that lasted far longer than the fish. Number 21, smothered veal chops. Veal was not a luxury in the 1950s. It was what butchers had too much of, especially near the meatpacking district. Harlem lunch counter cooks bought the chops cheap, browned them hard in cast iron, then buried them under heavy onion gravy and let them cook low for an hour. The meat came out so tender, it barely held to the bone. The gravy turned a plate of plain rice into a full meal. This was one of the more popular weekday plates, especially along 7th Avenue. By the 1980s, veal prices had risen sharply. Animal welfare campaigns made the meat controversial, and the counters that still existed quietly dropped it. Smothered veal chops never made the transition to modern soul food restaurants. The dish simply stopped. 25 plates from counters that never had a sign out front. If any of these crossed your family's table, you already knew the taste before the description ended. Try one this week. Simmer neck bones until the meat falls clean. Fry a slice of bologna until the edges blister. Bake a peach cobbler and cut it while the crust is still bubbling. Drop the plate your family turned into something nobody else could replicate